Have you ever felt like the world was looking right through you? Like you were standing in the middle of a crowded room, yet no one seemed to notice? What if everything you thought you knew about yourself was turned upside down in a single moment? What if the very thing that made you invisible to everyone else turned out to be the source of your true power? We all have moments in life when we're judged by the surface, by the way we look, by where we come from. But how many of us have ever stopped to wonder, what if those judgments don't define us? What if, beneath the surface, we're more than what they see, more than what we've been told we are? You might think you know where this story is headed, but trust me, you don't. You see, this isn't just a tale about a man working in a barn or a town full of prejudiced eyes. It's a story about power, respect, and the quiet strength that's been hiding in plain sight. Are you ready to see the truth? Then come, join me in discovering the mystery behind a man who was never meant to be seen for who he truly was, until someone looked closely enough. They thought I was nobody. Just a man in a barn, sweeping hay, feeding horses, cleaning stalls. They saw a brown face, rough hands, a man with nothing but dirt on his boots and the smell of leather in his lungs. They didn't see the scars. They didn't see the battles, the years of war that lived inside me. They saw me as their servant, their boy, their invisible worker. And for months, I let them think that. But this morning, something changed. I was moving through the barn, methodical, like I had every other day. The golden light from the early sun filtered through the cracks in the walls, the dust dancing in the air. It was quiet, almost peaceful. But the silence didn't last long. The barn doors creaked open, and I knew who it was before they even stepped inside. Thaddeus, Dutch, Samuel, the same men who thought I was nothing. They made their jokes, their insults, but I didn't respond, didn't flinch. I knew better. I'd learned long ago that speaking only made it worse. But when Samuel kicked over that bucket of grain, spilling it across the floor, something inside me snapped. The word boy hit me like a whip. I looked up at them, and for the first time in months, I saw them for what they were. Just men, small men, men who thought they could control me. Then I heard it, the sound of hooves, heavy, military. It was him, the colonel. I stood taller. My posture shifted. This wasn't just a fight with them. This was something more. The colonel's eyes found mine, and for the first time they would see me for who I really was. The barn was quiet again after they left, but the silence felt different this time. It wasn't the same calm that usually filled these walls, the kind that belonged to men and horses and sweat. This silence was heavy, like something was about to break. I stood there for a long time, staring at the scattered grain on the floor. Dutch, Thaddeus, Samuel, they thought I was nothing. They thought they could walk into my life and trample on me like I was just another piece of dirt. And for a while, I let them. Want to know more? Leave a comment with yes, and don't forget to hit that bell so you don't miss part 2. But not anymore. I had spent too many years pretending to be invisible. Too many years hiding behind the quiet, behind the work. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was the man I had been before this. The man who had fought for his people, who had stood shoulder to shoulder with generals and war chiefs, who had earned respect in places they could never dream of. They didn't know that Ayana Two Eagles had fought in battles that made their little town seem like a speck of dust on the map. They didn't know I had a name, a legacy, that I'd been a scout for the army, saving lives and negotiating peace when men like them were too busy counting their coins to even notice the world outside their walls. But I wasn't here to remind them. I wasn't here to boast about what I'd done or what I could do. I was here because they had crossed a line. Because no man, no matter where he comes from, no matter the color of his skin, should ever be made to feel less than human. I picked up my pitchfork again, the handle familiar in my hands, the weight of it grounding me. The door creaked open once more, and this time, I didn't flinch. Thaddeus walked back in, his boots heavy on the floorboards. I didn't look up, didn't need to. I knew why he was here. He had come to apologize, or maybe to threaten me again. I couldn't tell. "I didn't expect you to stay," he said, his voice gruff, like it hadn't been used in a while. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across me. "You could have left with them, with the colonel. You could have gone anywhere." I looked up at him then, finally meeting his eyes. There was a flicker of something in them, Something that made him look less like the arrogant man who had walked into my barn earlier, and more like someone who had seen the truth for the first time. "I'm not here for them," I said. "I'm here for me." Thaddeus didn't say anything for a long while. He stood there, his hands at his sides, his face unreadable. But I could see the way he was looking at me, the way the weight of his actions was beginning to sink in. "You should have never treated me like that," I said. "You should have never thought I was beneath you." He swallowed hard, and for the first time I saw the cracks in his armor. The man who thought he knew everything, who thought he could control everyone, was suddenly the one on the back foot. "I was wrong," he said finally, his voice softer than it had been before. "I thought you were just another one of them, just another man to boss around." I stood up then, my hand still gripping the pitchfork. "And that's exactly the problem. You never saw me for who I was. You never saw me for what I could do. You saw me for my skin. You saw me for my work." Thaddeus's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. For a moment, we just stood there, the silence between us thick and heavy. I didn't know what he was thinking. Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe he was angry. But for the first time, I didn't care. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice low. I took a deep breath, looking around the barn, at the walls that had witnessed so much, at the hay scattered on the floor, at the pitchfork in my hands. This barn had been my world for too long, a place where I had been invisible, a place where I had been nothing. But it wasn't just a barn anymore. "It ends now," I said. "Not for you, not for them, but for me." Thaddeus nodded slowly. "I don't know how to make it right." "You don't have to," I said. "I've already made it right. I'm here, and I'm standing." I turned back to my work, my movements methodical, my hands steady. There was something about the rhythm of it, the familiarity that calmed me. It was the only thing in this world that had ever felt certain. The work, the sweat, the fight. "You're free now," Thaddeus said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't look at him. "We're all free. We just have to choose to stand up." The barn door creaked again, and this time I didn't hesitate. I knew what was coming. I knew what I had to do. They would come again. They would try again. And this time, I would be ready. The barn might have been the place I started, but it wasn't where I would end. It wasn't where I would stay. And this town, this small, narrow-minded town, would never again be able to treat me like I was nobody. Because I was Ayanna Two Eagles, and I was more than just a barnkeeper. The silence after Thaddeus left hung heavy in the air, thick like the dust that danced in the fading light. The barn was still, as it had always been, but this time, it felt different. The weight of the words I'd spoken lingered between us, the Colonel and me. The tension wasn't gone, but it had shifted. I felt it in the way my muscles relaxed, the way my hands loosened their grip on the pitchfork. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I knew one thing for sure. This was the beginning of something. It wasn't a fight that would end with a single shot or a single word. It was something that had started long before this morning, and it would take more than just me to finish it. Colonel Whitfield moved slowly across the barn floor, boots scraping against the wooden planks. His eyes never left me, and I could feel the weight of his gaze like a brand. He wasn't looking at me like the others had. He wasn't seeing just an Indian in a barn. He was seeing a man who had earned his place, even if it wasn't in their eyes. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. The respect, the recognition. It wasn't something I'd ever wanted, not really. But now, in this moment, with this man standing before me, I couldn't deny that it meant something. "Tell me something, Ayanna." The Colonel's voice broke the silence, deep and steady. "How long have you been in this town?" I didn't answer right away. My eyes flicked to the door where the others had left, where they had made their cruel marks. I had worked for them, for this town, for months. I had been their ghost, unseen, unnoticed. "A year," I finally said. "Maybe more." He nodded, as if that wasn't the answer he was expecting, but he didn't push. Instead, he studied me for a long moment, like he was looking for something more than just a barnkeeper in worn clothes. I saw it then, something behind his gaze, recognition, respect. "I've heard stories about you," he said, taking another step forward. But I didn't believe them. Stories. There had been plenty of them. Some said I was a simple worker, a man with nothing to my name. Some said I had been a warrior, a scout, but none of them knew the truth. They didn't know what I had done, what I had seen. "Don't believe everything you hear, Colonel," I said, meeting his eyes without hesitation. "Most of it's not true." He smiled then, just a little, as if he knew exactly what I meant. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the leather of his uniform, the musk of sweat and horse from his long ride. There was something about him, something different from the others. "You don't talk much, do you?" he asked, his voice softer now. "No need to," I replied. "Words don't always say what's needed." The colonel's smile faded, replaced by something more serious. "You're right," he said, his eyes narrowing. "But you're going to have to talk now." I knew what he meant. There was a reason he had come here. And it wasn't just to stand in a barn and ask questions. This was bigger than Copper Ridge, bigger than me. "Look," I said, my voice steady. "I didn't come here to talk. I came here to work. I came here because this is the only place left where they don't know my name. And for a while, that was enough." "But it's not enough anymore?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, it's not." The weight of that hung between us, both of us understanding the truth but not saying it aloud. It wasn't just about the work anymore. It wasn't about hiding in plain sight, living under the radar. It was about something else now, something that had been building inside me for a long time, something that was finally ready to come to the surface. "I didn't come here to start a war," I said, "but I'll end it if I have to." The colonel studied me, his expression unreadable. For a moment I thought he might speak, but instead, he just nodded, like he understood. "You're not alone in this, Ayanna," he said, his voice steady. "The fight isn't just yours, and the war, it's not over. Not by a long shot." I looked at him, my brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the window and looked out, as if considering his next words carefully. The air outside had started to change, the wind picking up, the promise of something coming. "You know as well as I do that the Apache are more than just raiders," he said, his voice distant now, like he was seeing something far away. "They've been pushed too far. The war isn't just about them anymore. It's about everything we've lost, everything we've taken." I felt the shift then, the moment when everything changed. The past, the future, the land beneath us, all of it was in motion. And I was standing in the middle of it, caught between what was and what could be. "Then what do we do?" I asked, my voice hoarse, unsure. The colonel turned to me, his eyes sharp and clear. "We finish this, Ayanna. We do it together. And we do it right." I didn't need to ask him what he meant. I knew. I knew that the town of Copper Ridge wasn't ready for what was coming. I knew that the men in this town, who had treated me like a ghost, would be forced to face the truth. And I knew that when it was all over, the only thing left standing would be what we chose to leave behind. "I'll stand with you," I said, my voice low but steady. "But this time, we do it on our terms." The colonel nodded, and I saw something shift in his eyes. Respect. Not just for the man I was, but for the man I was becoming. He turned back to the door, the weight of what was to come still heavy in the air. "We start tomorrow," he said. "Get ready, Ayanna. It's going to be a long fight." I watched him leave, the door closing behind him, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running anymore. I was ready. The sound of hooves in the distance told me everything I needed to know. The fight was coming. The wind howled through the trees, the dust swirling in the air like a living thing. The morning light flickered through the cracks in the barn, but there was nothing warm about it. The tension in the air was thick, heavy, and I could feel it in my bones. My hands were steady as I finished securing the pitchfork in my grip. It had always been my weapon of choice here, in this barn, in this small corner of the world. But today, it felt like more than just a tool. It felt like my last line of defense. Colonel Whitfield had left, but he'd given me a promise. And for the first time, it wasn't a promise to protect someone else. It was a promise to fight. To end this once and for all. I wasn't sure how long it had been since I'd walked into this town. A year, two, time didn't matter much out here. The only thing that mattered was the work, the survival, but the work had changed me. I wasn't just a man in the shadows anymore. I wasn't just some invisible hand moving hay and muck. I was someone worth fighting for, and today that fight was going to take everything I had. The barn doors creaked open. I didn't turn to look. I knew who it was. Thaddeus Crane, the man who had led the men who had tried to break me, the man who had made me feel like nothing. He stepped into the barn, boots clicking against the wooden floor, his shadow falling across the hay. "Ayanna," he said, his voice low, almost tentative. "I didn't think you'd still be here." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The silence between us said everything that needed to be said. Thaddeus walked closer, his steps slow, deliberate, like he was trying to gauge the distance between us. "You've been here long enough," he said, his voice harder now. "This isn't your fight. This isn't your town." I finally turned to face him, my eyes meeting his. His words hung in the air, but they didn't touch me. Not anymore. Not after everything I had been through, everything I had lost, everything I had gained. "This is my fight," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the tension. "And I'm not going anywhere." Thaddeus's jaw tightened, and I saw the conflict in his eyes. He had never seen me as anything more than a servant, a man who had no place in this world. But he was wrong. I was done being invisible, done being the man who cleans up after them, done being the one they could kick around. It was time to show them what they had underestimated. "I don't care what you think," I said. "You're not the one who decides where I belong, and I'm not the one who's going to run anymore." Thaddeus stared at me for a long time, as if he was seeing me for the first time. The same man who had belittled me, who had taken my silence as weakness, now saw something else, something he couldn't deny. "You think you can stand against them?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "I've already stood against worse," I said, my words steady. "This town's not my enemy, but the people in it. They need to understand something. They need to understand who I am." Thaddeus didn't speak again. He just stood there, his eyes hard, but there was something in them that wasn't there before, something like respect, or maybe just acknowledgement. Outside, the sound of the horses grew louder, closer, the men who had been tormenting me, but this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't just going to take it. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. The door creaked again, and I heard the familiar voices of Dutch and Samuel. Their laughter made my skin crawl, but I kept my gaze steady, knowing what was coming. They thought they could break me. They thought they could keep me down. They were wrong. I turned back to Thaddeus. "You don't have to fight this fight," I said, my voice softer now. "But if you stand with me, I'll make sure we finish this." Thaddeus looked at me for a long moment, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Maybe it was regret, maybe it was respect, but it didn't matter. He was here, and that was all that counted. The barn doors burst open again, and they walked in. Dutch and Samuel, the same smug faces, the same arrogance. But this time, it was different. I wasn't the one they could push around anymore. "You're still here?" Dutch sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "I thought we'd gotten rid of you, old man." I didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't let their words touch me. "I'm still here," I said, my voice quiet, but it rang with something they weren't expecting. "And I'm not leaving." Samuel laughed, but it didn't sound like the laugh of a man who thought he had power. It sounded nervous, unsure. They could feel it too. The shift in the air, the change in me. "You really think you can stand up to us?" Samuel said, stepping forward, trying to intimidate. But I didn't back down. "Not just you," I said, meeting his gaze, "but anyone who thinks they can walk over me." Dutch took a step forward, his hand hovering over his belt, where he kept a knife. "You think you're a threat?" I didn't answer him with words. I stepped forward, my boots heavy on the wooden floor, my posture tall and unyielding. I was done being the invisible man. I was done being the one they ignored. "You'll regret underestimating me," I said, my voice cold. but there was fire in my chest. The silence that followed felt like the calm before a storm, and then the sound of hooves, the unmistakable rhythm of military horses approaching again. It wasn't just any group this time. This was it, the moment everything changed. Thaddeus looked at me, his eyes wide now, as if he finally saw who I truly was. "They're coming," he whispered. I nodded. "And this time, we're ready." The door slammed open, and for the first time, I didn't just see men coming to tear me down. I saw men who were about to learn what happens when you push someone too far. The barn was still, but the air had changed. It wasn't the smell of hay or leather anymore. It was the scent of something else. Tension. A feeling that had been building ever since Thaddeus and the others walked in that morning. The fight was coming, and I wasn't sure how I felt about it anymore. I had spent a long time making peace with the fact that I was invisible. The barn had been my sanctuary, my refuge from the world that had judged me, and I had worked hard to stay out of sight. It was easier that way. No one bothered me, and I didn't have to face the anger or the prejudice. But I wasn't just a barn keeper anymore. Not after today. Not after what the colonel had said. The sound of boots scraping against wood jolted me out of my thoughts. Thaddeus stood by the door watching me. His expression was still hard, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A flicker of uncertainty, maybe even a little respect. He opened his mouth to say something, but I beat him to it. "Do you regret it?" I asked, my voice rough. He blinked, clearly surprised by the question. "What? Do you regret thinking I was nothing?" I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "Do you regret treating me like dirt, like I didn't matter?" Thaddeus shifted, his jaw tightening. He didn't speak right away, but I could tell he was thinking, weighing my words. His silence spoke volumes. He knew he had been wrong, and for the first time, he wasn't fighting it. He wasn't trying to defend himself. "No," he said finally, his voice low. "I don't regret seeing who you are now, but I regret not seeing it sooner." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to tell him everything I had been through, all the times I had been ignored and humiliated. But another part of me understood. He had been a product of his world, just like I had been. We had all been shaped by the lives we lived, the pain we carried. I turned back to the window, looking out at the wide, open land. There was something about the vastness that always made me feel small, but today, it was different. Today, the land seemed to stretch out, offering something new. A chance. "You've been running, Ayanna," Thaddeus said quietly, "but you don't have to anymore." I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time today. Thaddeus Crane, the man who had treated me like a servant, like an animal. But there was something else in his eyes now, something that wasn't pity, something that was understanding. "I've been running for a long time," I said, my voice steady. "But I don't think I can keep running anymore." He nodded, and for the first time I saw him as something more than just the town's self-appointed leader. I saw a man who had lived through his own battles, a man who understood what it meant to carry a weight. "We all have things to make up for," Thaddeus said, "but we can't keep running from them." I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. The truth was in my chest, burning like a fire that refused to go out. I was tired of running, tired of being invisible. I was ready to stand, ready to face whatever came next. The door opened again, this time without hesitation. Dutch and Samuel stood there, their faces unreadable. They hadn't expected me to still be here. They hadn't expected me to stand my ground. "Boy," Dutch sneered, his voice as slimy as always. "Still think you can walk around here like you own the place?" I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I stood there, my feet planted firmly on the floor, and stared him down. Dutch, Samuel, and Thaddeus. They had all underestimated me, and it was time for them to see what I was really capable of. "I'm not your boy," I said quietly, my voice carrying across the barn like a warning. Dutch took a step forward, but this time I didn't back down. This time I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't afraid of anyone. "I'm not here to fight you," I said, "but I'm not going to let you walk all over me anymore. I've earned my place. You may not like it, but you will respect it." For a long moment, there was nothing but silence, the tension between us thick, heavy in the air. But this time, it wasn't just my silence. It was theirs too. Then Thaddeus stepped forward. He didn't speak. He just walked toward me, his boots steady on the ground. And when he reached me, he stopped. His eyes met mine, and I saw it. The respect I had been waiting for. "You've earned it, Ayanna," he said, his voice steady. You've earned more than this town will ever give you." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The truth was in his eyes, and in mine. Dutch and Samuel were still standing there unsure, but neither of them dared to speak now. The balance had shifted, and they could feel it. They could feel the power in the room, and it wasn't theirs anymore. For the first time, I felt like I truly belonged here. Not because of the work I did, not because of the things they had forced me to endure, but because I had chosen to stand. I had chosen to be more than just a man cleaning stalls. "You're not going to break me," I said, turning back to the window, "and neither of you will." The silence stretched between us, but this time it wasn't oppressive. It was a quiet understanding, a mutual respect that had taken far too long to build. "You should leave," I said quietly, without looking back, "before things get worse for you." Dutch and Samuel didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between us told everything. They turned and walked out, their steps slower than before. I didn't watch them leave. I didn't need to. I had already won. The battle was over. Thaddeus stayed behind, watching me in the quiet of the barn. "I didn't expect this," he said finally, his voice still unsure. "I didn't either," I replied. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel lost. I didn't feel like a man hiding in the shadows. I felt like a man who had found his place, and it was mine to keep. The silence in the barn was deafening. The horses shifted restlessly in their stalls, but their movements were the only sound in the thick stillness. I stood there, my back straight, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The men who had been tormenting me for months were gone, their footsteps fading into the distance, but the battle wasn't over. Thaddeus had left, but I knew he was still out there. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, even if he wasn't standing beside me. He had seen me differently now, and that was the problem. He wasn't the only one. I had spent years hiding behind the work, behind the barn doors, behind the silence. But now, there was no more hiding. There was no more running. The world was looking at me, and for the first time, I wasn't invisible. The door creaked open again, and I tensed. But it wasn't the men from Copper Ridge this time. It wasn't Thaddeus or Dutch or Samuel. It was someone else. Someone who had been waiting just outside the town. Someone who had been watching. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The way the boots sounded on the ground, the way the air shifted, I knew. Colonel Whitfield. He stepped inside the barn, his boots loud against the wooden floor, and I felt a shift in the air. His presence was commanding, not because of his uniform or the military rank he carried, but because of something deeper. It was the way he carried himself, the way the weight of his authority seemed to settle into the room like it belonged there. For a moment, he said nothing. He just watched me, his eyes studying me the way a general might observe a soldier about to go into battle. "Not the man I expected to see here," he said, his voice low but steady. I didn't answer him immediately. The words were there, ready to be said, but I held them back. The silence between us was comfortable, almost like we understood each other in a way I didn't fully understand myself. Finally, I spoke. "I'm not the man you expected," I said quietly, "but I'm the man standing here now." The colonel didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He simply nodded, as if my words had confirmed something he already knew. "You've done more than stand, Ayanna," he said, his voice carrying a certain weight. "You've earned your place, and I'm here to make sure you keep it." I looked at him then, truly looked at him. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't here to belittle me, to shove me into the corner. He wasn't even here to judge me. He was here because he understood something deeper than they ever would. The truth. The truth about respect, about who I was, about who I had been. "You don't need to do that," I said, my voice steady. "I've already earned it." "I know you have," he said, his tone almost gentle. "But there's a difference between earning respect and having it given to you. You've earned it, but it's time for others to see it too." I wasn't sure what he meant at first, but I knew one thing for sure. He wasn't here to pat me on the back or offer me empty words. The colonel was here because he saw something in me, something that no one else had ever bothered to see. The sound of horses grew louder again, but this time, I wasn't afraid. This time, I didn't feel like the man who had been cowering in the shadows of Copper Ridge. This time, I was the man who had already made his choice, and I was ready to face whatever came next. "We don't have much time," Colonel Whitfield said, his voice firm, no longer soft. "The Apache are closer than we thought, and they're not going to wait." I nodded. It was time. The town didn't know what was coming. They didn't know that they were about to be forced to face the consequences of their actions, but I did. and I wasn't going to let them off easy. "I'm ready," I said. "I've been ready for a long time." The colonel turned toward the barn doors, looking out into the distance. "Then let's get moving," he said. I followed him, stepping out into the open air. The sun was rising now, casting long shadows across the land, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The sounds of hooves were unmistakable. The Apache were coming, but this time, they weren't the only ones. We walked toward the town, the colonel and me, and for the first time I felt like I was not just a worker, not just a man cleaning stalls. I was a man with purpose, a man who had fought and bled for what he believed in, and now it was time for the world to see it. The town of Copper Ridge didn't know what was coming. They didn't know that their fate had already been decided. But I did, and Colonel Whitfield did. We had both seen enough to know that sometimes the only way to move forward was to face the past. As we approached the edge of the town, I could see them, the people who had never respected me, the men who had kicked me down, who had treated me like a piece of dirt, and now it was time for them to see what happened when you underestimated the quiet man in the barn. The colonel turned to me, his gaze steady. "You ready for this?" I didn't hesitate. "I've been ready for years." We stepped into Copper Ridge together, ready to face whatever was coming. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. Because I knew that this fight wasn't just mine anymore. The sun had barely risen when we rode into Copper Ridge. The town was still asleep, its dusty streets empty, the shops closed, the saloon quiet. But the silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that came before a storm. I could feel the eyes on me before I even entered the town. The same eyes that had looked through me for months, the same eyes that had seen nothing but a man to be used and discarded. But today, they wouldn't see that. Colonel Whitfield rode beside me, his presence a steady reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. The weight of the past still hung heavy in the air, but it wasn't suffocating anymore. I was ready to face it, ready to face them. I didn't look at Thaddeus when I passed his shop, but I felt his gaze. I knew he was watching. I knew he had seen something in me that had shifted, something that had made him realize how wrong he had been. The town wasn't ready for this. They weren't ready for the truth of who I was, but they were about to learn. We stopped in front of the general store. The men who had tormented me for months were standing there, looking uncomfortable. They had heard the hooves, felt the change in the air. They knew something was different, but they didn't know what. Thaddeus stepped forward, his eyes still hard, but there was something else in them now. Regret, maybe, or fear. It didn't matter. "I never thought you'd be the one to stand," he said, his voice low. I looked him in the eye. "I'm standing now, and I'm not going anywhere. The town would never be the same after today, and neither would I." The story of Ayanna Two Eagles is one that resonates deeply because it speaks to something every human being understands at their core. The quest for respect, recognition, and the fight to be seen for who we truly are. In the world of Copper Ridge, Ayanna was nothing more than a barnkeeper, a worker in the background, invisible to the townsfolk. For months, the people of that town saw him as less than human, someone who didn't deserve respect. They saw his skin, his past, and made assumptions about his worth. They never bothered to learn who he truly was, what he had endured, or what he had sacrificed for the greater good. But what makes this story so powerful is that Ayanna didn't respond to their cruelty with anger or violence. Instead, he chose to stand quietly, carrying his pride in the face of relentless disrespect. He didn't need to prove himself through words. His actions spoke louder than anything they could say. His strength, his silence, and his dignity spoke to something deeper than their judgments. What happens in the barn when Colonel Whitfield calls Ayanna Sir is the turning point. The recognition from the colonel shifts the entire narrative. The man who had been nothing in the eyes of the townsfolk was now seen for the hero he truly was. The revelation that Ayanna wasn't just a barnkeeper, but a decorated scout, a man who had earned the Congressional Medal of Honor, sends shockwaves through everyone who had ever underestimated him. This moment forces the townsmen, and by extension the audience, to confront a hard truth, that we often fail to see the value in people based on preconceived notions, stereotypes, or fear of the unknown. We make judgments based on appearance or past mistakes, and we miss the deeper qualities that define a person's worth. In life, we often face moments where we are judged before we are truly seen. Maybe it's because of our background, our appearance, or our past choices. Maybe we've been overlooked, passed over, or labeled by others. But the lesson in Ayanna's story is clear. No one has the right to define your worth except for you. Ayana didn't let their prejudice or disrespect define him. He kept his silence, knowing that one day someone would see him for who he truly was. And when that moment came, it didn't just change the way others saw him, it changed how he saw himself. He wasn't just a survivor of his past, he was a man who had conquered it. So, what can we learn from Ayana's story? First, we learn the value of patience and perseverance. Ayana didn't lash out, didn't seek revenge. He understood that the true measure of a man is not found in his anger, but in his ability to endure and rise above. Patience in the face of adversity is something we all need. It's easy to react in anger, to try to prove our worth to those who doubt us. But the true power lies in waiting for the right moment, in choosing when and how to stand. Second, we learn the importance of self-worth. Ayana didn't need anyone's approval to know who he was. He didn't need to shout his accomplishments from the rooftops. He simply existed in his own truth. In life, we often look for validation from others. We want to be seen, to be acknowledged. But the lesson here is that our worth comes from within. No one can define us unless we let them. And finally, Ayana's story teaches us about the power of respect. Respect isn't given because of one's position or appearance. It's earned by the way we carry ourselves, by how we treat others, and by the quiet strength we exude. The colonel recognized Ayana not because of his title, but because he had earned it, through his actions, his character, and his integrity. In our own lives, we should always strive to treat others with the respect they deserve, regardless of their station in life, their background, or their past. There will always be people who try to put you down, who try to define you by the things they see on the surface. But remember this, your value is not defined by their opinions or their expectations. You are more than what they think you are. Like Ayana, you have the power to stand tall, to rise above their judgment, and to be seen for the person you truly are. And just like Ayana, you can choose to turn your silence into strength, your perseverance into power, and your respect into an unshakable foundation that no one can take away from you. If Ayana's story resonated with you, hit subscribe and share it with someone who needs a reminder that their worth is not determined by how others see them. What would you do if you were finally seen for who you truly are? How would you stand in the face of judgment? Let me know in the comments below. Take a step today to stand for yourself, no matter what the world thinks. Don't let anyone define you but yourself.